One Chinese city is issuing an extreme punishment for spreading COVID-19, the death penalty. The news has sparked a round of questions, including where the new rule came from, Chinese authorities or the court. Here's more.
A southwestern border city in China is taking a severe hand to anyone found to spread COVID-19. It targets those who are infected and cross the border into China without permission, or who help someone else who's infected cross. Punishments include fines, the confiscation of property, and even the death penalty. Fangchenggang City issued the notice last week. The news triggered heated discussion on social media. Some say they're for strict COVID-19 related rules, but others questioned if the local authorities have the right to dole out the death penalty over it. One post reads, "They need to understand the law in the first place. The power to determine the death penalty is held by the Supreme Court, not a small town's government." The notice and the list of punishments were deleted from local authorities' official social media accounts the following day. It's not the first time Chinese authorities have threatened extreme consequences for violating COVID-19 rules. Last December, in another southern Chinese city called Baise, authorities paraded a couple of residents through the streets as a form of public humiliation after they allegedly violated local COVID-19 restrictions. Police hung signs around their necks displaying their names and photos. Each resident was held by 2 police officers and surrounded by armed riot police.
An open letter signed by dozens of Chinese entrepreneurs and investors. It calls for political reform in China and lists a number of fundamental social changes. Let's zoom in.
An anonymous open letter is circulating in China, stirring up debate. The letter was endorsed by dozens of entrepreneurs and investors, mainly from Shanghai. It says together they hold tens of billions of dollars of investment, but even businesses on this scale are struggling to protect themselves and survive in China's pandemic-stricken economy. They say the country's lockdown experience made them, quote, completely sober and helped them realize that the credibility of China's communist regime has already collapsed. So, facing predicted turmoil, they decided to speak up. In protest, they've decided not to obey authorities' instructions to go back to normal productions post-lockdown, saying their companies will resume operations but not production. Frank Xie is a professor in business at University of South Carolina, Aiken. He explained it's hard for businesses to jumpstart production after 2 months under lockdown, especially because they're coping with broken supply chains. He added that the entrepreneur's strategy is in essence a strike.
We see that this is essentially the start of a general strike by the industrial sector, the business sector, the workers, the private capitalists, the people from all walks of life in Shanghai. In fact, they're calling for a longer social strike.
Xie said the entrepreneurs are protesting against the regime.
A government cannot recklessly close down such a large city, a city of more than 20 million and so many businesses in it, all of a sudden without any discussion and out of political reasons.
On top of disobedience in business, the letter also urges for political reform. The goal? To, quote, unshackle economic development from politics. To achieve it, the letter lists a number of fundamental social changes it says should be made, including giving residents permanent rights to their land. Right now, all land in China belongs to the Communist Party. People and businesses merely purchase the right to use the land, normally for a few dozen years. That includes land with residential housing as well as commercial space. The letter also calls for removing bans and on a multi-party governance system and private media platforms. Beyond that, it pushes to eliminate the privileged social class and the hukou system. That's the equivalent of an intra-provincial passport and a tool that makes China's 800 million farmers the target of discrimination. The privileged social class refers to high-level party officials and their families, who often receive special privileges and treatment.
The Shanghai industries use strikes to compel the Chinese Communist Party to carry out political reforms and force the CCP to step down from the stage of history. That is, in my opinion, a very positive approach to dismantle the CCP on the civilian level.
U.S.-based news service Radio Free Asia managed to contact several of the letter's authors. They say they'll continue to promote the letter's contents, but they requested they remain anonymous for security reasons.
The U.S. State Department is launching a new team of diplomats. They are tasked with addressing what they call the country's most important geopolitical threat.
The scale and the scope of the challenge posed by the People's Republic of China will test American diplomacy like nothing we've seen before. I'm determined to give the State Department and our diplomats the tools that they need to meet this challenge head-on as part of my modernization agenda. This includes building a China House, a department-wide integrated team that will coordinate and implement our policy across issues and regions, working with Congress as needed.
Blinken didn't give details about the China House team structure or operations, though a White House spokesperson said later that Washington will speed up the process of adding resources and expertise on China to it. According to a foreign policy report from last September, the new coordination effort is directed to watch China's growing footprints in the world's major countries. The report estimated that 20 to 30 staff members will be assigned to the task, including a number of regional China Watch officers. The report also cited an insider as saying the official launch of China House may come in 2024 and that its future office building is currently under renovation. Earlier this month, a video appeared on social media appearing to show a happy family in Xinjiang.
Ladies and gentlemen, the party is heating up in this ordinary Kazakh house. Woo!
Those seniors and children were seen smiling and dancing a traditional Kazakh dance.
Awesome.
Something seems off in the atmosphere. Around 53 seconds into the video, what looks like police are spotted standing outside the window, closely monitoring what's happening inside the house. According to Radio Free Asia, the video was originally posted on YouTube by Jerry Good, a foreign internet celebrity living in China. He visited Xinjiang, supposedly to provide proof that the Chinese Communist Party was not committing genocide against the Uyghur ethnic minority. President of the Uyghur Association of Japan told Radio Free Asia that in the current tightly controlled Xinjiang, it's impossible for a foreigner to enter, leave, and film freely, and that Jerry Good is a foreigner manipulated by Beijing. The video was later taken down from YouTube. If the so-called proof was indeed staged by the Chinese regime, it wouldn't be the first. Last year, China promoted a series of videos in which Uyghurs denied that Beijing was committing human rights violations. House Republicans are proposing a new rule, one that would block big tech from doling out social media accounts to senior Chinese Communist Party officials. The rule would apply to all U.S.-owned social media platforms. That's according to a Fox News exclusive report. The measure is called China Social Media Reciprocity Act. The would-be ban comes built with one exception. That is, when the president can certify that the CCP department or individual in question has, quote, verifiably removed prohibitions on officials of the U.S. government from accessing, using, or participating in social media platforms in China. The president's power to waive the bill would span 2 years, while final say lies with Congress. Fox News cited a committee aide as saying that CCP agencies need to remove all curbs that block Chinese users from accessing U.S.-posted contents. That way, users in both countries will have equal access to each other's platforms. The rule would apply to all centralized organs of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as high-ranking officials from other Chinese state agencies. For years, the West has complained that China's state subsidies allow Chinese businesses to offer much lower prices than overseas competitors, including in the production of solar panels. A recent report backed up that accusation. Here's more.
According to a recent report by U.S. research organization, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, China's industrial policy spending was over $400 billion in 2019. This means China spent almost 2% of its GDP to subsidize businesses, more than its defense spending. It's much higher than all the other economies the report studied. For comparison, the U.S. only spent 0.4% of its GDP on business subsidies. The subsidies make it possible for Chinese manufacturers to earn more than rivals from other countries. By producing one piece of solar panel, a Taiwanese company may get a $2 profit, but a Chinese company may be able to make $10. That is why around 2007 or 2008, Chinese solar panels were dumped into the global market at very low prices. This almost killed all Taiwanese solar panel manufacturers, and even American and German products were butchered. China subsidizes businesses in many ways. Besides direct subsidies, the regime can also provide support through tax incentives, state investment funds, below-market credit to state-owned enterprises, below-market land sales to firms, and many other methods. Subsidies not only go to state-owned businesses, but also the so-called private businesses. In Communist China, all entities have to follow the Communist Party's instructions or otherwise face clampdowns by authorities.
Alabama or Huawei, for example, they look like private businesses, but we all know that the Chinese Communist regime is behind these companies. Because the World Trade Organization only regulates government behavior, in a way, the WTO can't do anything about China's subsidies to these companies. Of course, American, European, or Japanese companies can't compete with such government power.
Experts say that China uses state power to compete with private businesses from other countries, and that this is not only unfair, but also against international regulations.
One entry in a supplementary reading list has sparked debate. It's part of Chinese high school curriculum. The story depicts a Chinese Communist Party or CCP member killing his wife, all for the party's so-called revolutionary cause. The story is set in pre-1949 China, before the Communist Party took power. The story's author says his grandfather worked for the CCP and raised funds in the form of gold bars to fund the regime's military. But the author's grandmother took the gold bars and ran away. His grandfather couldn't stop her, so he killed her. But the story got a different kind of attention after it was posted on social media. Backlash poured in from internet users, one of which described it as a purely fabricated style of writing. Another accused the CCP of trying to brainwash students, writing, "They shape your children with CCP nature from an early age, train them to be a Chinese Communist Party member rather than a human."